In the previous lesson, what we did was spend some time talking about the classic theory of knowledge, sometimes known as justified true belief. This lesson is going to present one of the most famous and major challenges to this theory of knowledge, sometimes known as the Gettier problem, or Gettier cases. And what we will do in this lesson specifically is provide evidence and examples of the Gettier problem and the cases that illustrate it. We'll then also think about the reasoning for why this is a particular problem for the theory of justified true belief. And we'll think about responses to the Gettier problem as well. How somebody who is a proponent of this classical theory of knowledge might still nevertheless want to derive the conclusion that the justified true belief theory of knowledge is still nevertheless superior to any other theory. So that's what we're going to do in this lesson. So the Gettier problem, if we just go back first to the basic idea of justified true belief. I'm just going to give you a very quick rundown from the previous lesson. Essentially, we know what the justified true belief definition of knowledge is. According to this definition, for a person to know a proposition, for a person to have knowledge of a proposition, that means that three conditions must be met. First, there must be belief. The person must believe in the proposition. Second, there must be truth. The proposition itself must in and of itself be true. We'll get to theories of truth in future lessons, but for now let's just take as read what we know to be true. And then third and finally, the person must have a sufficient justification for why they believe in that proposition. Their belief in that proposition cannot just be random or coincidence. That does not count as being as having knowledge of a particular proposition. The Gettier problem is a major challenge that was introduced by Edmund Gettier in a paper from 1963. The paper from 1963 is titled Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And in this paper, Gettier presented a number of cases in which an individual has a belief that is justified and is true, but is nevertheless not considered knowledge. The Gettier problem then has sparked a quite important debate within epistemology, because essentially what it does is that it suggests that the traditional theory of knowledge that we've all sort of understood for many, many years, the tripartite theory of knowledge, has a number of flaws. It needs to be at least modified or maybe even replaced completely. So just taking the tripartite theory of knowledge, if someone was to believe the proposition that, quote, the Earth orbits the sun, okay, this is a belief that is true and is justified. You can believe in it, it is a proposition that is true, and you can, through scientific empirical evidence, justify why you have a belief in that particular proposition. Then, according to this tripartite theory of knowledge, the person would be said to have knowledge that the Earth orbits around the sun. However, Gettier showed that it is possible for a person to satisfy all the three conditions of the tripartite theory of knowledge, and still not have knowledge of that particular thing. And in doing so, he presented something, he used the issue of Gettier cases. So, in the paper itself, the paper is Justified True Belief Knowledge, Gettier provided a number of counterexamples. These were what he described as Gettier cases that demonstrated that in which someone has justified true belief but does not seem to have knowledge. These are cases that are designed to show that this tripartite theory does in fact fail. So one of the classic cases involves two individuals. Let's say the first individual is Smith and the other individual is Jones. Let's say that Smith is applying for a job and is certain that he will get it because the hiring manager told him that that Jones, who is also a candidate, the other candidate, would be the one chosen. Based on this information, Smith believes that Jones will get the job. As a result, Smith also believes that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith has no further evidence for the second part of his belief, but based on his reasoning, he believes both parts to be true. Okay, a little bit weird, but let's just get to the second point. In fact, Smith is mistaken about the first part of his belief. In fact, Jones does not get the job. However, Smith, through sheer luck, happens to have 10 coins in his own pocket. And because Smith's belief about Jones having 10 coins is true, okay, or Jones's belief having 10 coins is true due to having 10 coins, his belief is true. His belief is also justified because Smith had reason to believe that Jones had 10 coins, but it was true due to luck, not due to reliable or rational justification. So in this case, then, Smith has a justified true belief, okay, about having that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, but it seems particularly inappropriate to say that Smith has knowledge of this fact, that they know that this is the case. The belief was justified and true, but the justification for the belief is still nevertheless seemingly flawed, and the truth was discovered by mere coincidence. Now, why does this actually present a problem? Why does this actually present a problem for the classic tripartite theory of truth? Why is this an issue? Well, the Gettier problem matters because it shows that this tripartite theory of knowledge fails to account for situations in which somebody arrives at true belief through unreliable or accidental means. Okay, so in these Gettier cases, the conditions for belief, truth, and justification are still nevertheless satisfied. They're still satisfied in a traditional sense, but the belief doesn't seem to amount to knowledge because the truth was reached by luck, not through reliable or rational processes. So, in the previous lesson, what we did was talk about how justification might be reached by, that someone may believe a thing without justification because their reasoning was reached by some accidental means. What if the truth was reached by accidental means? What if truth was reached by luck, not through a reliable or rational process? Well, there are responses to this problem. Epistemologists have proposed a variety of solutions. Now, not one of these solutions has emerged as being the sort of universally accepted conclusion. This is philosophy after all, but these typically involve a number of elements to modifying the previous tripartite theory. Some of them involve adding a fourth condition into the definition of the justified true belief, or altering the criteria for justification in some way. So the first of these is known as the no false lemmas condition. So one common solution is to add a condition to the justified true belief definition called no false lemmas condition. Essentially what this condition does is assert that for someone to know a proposition, the belief must not be based on any false premises or any false assumptions. So if we go back to the Gettier example of Smith and Jones and the 10 coins, Smith's belief that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket would be based, according to this solution, on a false lemma, the assumption that Jones would get the job, but which means essentially that his justification is flawed. And so under this new condition, Smith would not be said to have knowledge of the fact that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket because the belief was based on a false assumption. So that's how you get around this idea, essentially, of trying to eliminate the possibility of that luck or happenstance might be able to play a role in the arrival at truth of a belief. But again, not usually universally accepted, and can actually also face some challenges in more complex Gettier cases. We might get to that when we look at some more advanced lessons in the future, but generally, this is one of the things that you slip this condition into the justified true belief definition in order to get rid of or get around some of these conditions and these Gettier cases that were proposed, like the Smith and Jones example. Another response to the Gettier problem comes from a field of epistemology known as reliabilism. This is where knowledge depends on the reliability of the process that leads to the belief, hence the name reliabilism. According to this theory, then, a belief would be justified if it was formed by a reliable process, and that this reliable process tends to come about and produce true beliefs. So again, if we go back to the example of Smith and Jones and the 10 coins, if Smith's belief in Jones having 10 coins were to be formed by a reliable process, so for example, if Smith had observed the 10 coins in Jones's pocket, then that is what would be considered knowledge. Even if it turned out to be true by coincidence, there is still a certain degree of reliability that can then add to the credibility of that knowledge, or the credibility of attaining that knowledge. And so in this view, knowledge depends on whether the process by which the belief was formed is reliable, not just on the truth and justification of the belief in and of themselves. So the point of reliabilism then is to try and resolve the Gettier problem by emphasizing that there is a certain importance that is associated with not only that beliefs are formed, but also how beliefs are formed. So rather than focusing solely on whether or not a belief is justified, as is the case in a theory of justified true belief, also focusing on how somebody arrives at that belief in the first place. This is attractive because it shifts the focus to the reliability of cognitive processes, and obviously draws into question a number of challenges to somebody's belief in particular things because of their cognitive biases or processes that may be flawed in one way or another. Another response to the Gettier problem is known as the causal theory of knowledge. What the causal theory of knowledge does is that it suggests that in addition to the conditions that we already have for the tripartite definition, belief, truth, and justification, that there must also be a causal connection that exists in there somewhere as well. So this causal connection must exist, for example, between the belief and the fact that makes the belief true. So according to this theory, a person knows something only if their belief is causally connected to the fact that they believe in. And so, again, if we were to go back to the example that I gave of Smith and Jones and the 10 coins, the proposition Jones has 10 coins might be justified by his reasoning, but the causal connection between the belief and the actual truth is still quite weak. The truth was merely coincidental rather than being caused by some kind of reasoning, rationale, or perception on the part of Smith. And so therefore, the causal theory would actually reject that Smith has any knowledge of this particular proposition, because the belief in question that happens to be true is still nevertheless not causally connected to the truth. And so this causal theory tries again to eliminate the role that coincidence or happenstance or luck can play in the acquisition of knowledge, because by contrast, it requires a direct causal link between belief and truth. The penultimate objection or response to the Gettier problem is sometimes known as epistemic contextualism. So this is a proposition, again, that is trying to assert a solution to the Gettier problem. According to this view, the standards for knowing something might vary and change depending on the context in which the knowledge is being claimed. So, for example, in a situation that is just an everyday example, we might say that someone knows something with a relatively weak justification. So, for example, if I were to tell you that it was busy in Tesco today, you might just believe me, or you might just say that I have knowledge of that thing without necessarily having to sit me down and think about a strong standard for why I have knowledge of that, because it's a day-to-day problem, and so the context is what matters. Whereas in more rigorous contexts, such as science or mathematics, much stronger standards exist. And you might think, well, this is not particularly, this is quite a loose form of epistemology, but it's a form that actually we operate in society. The civil law versus the criminal law in a legal system requires different standards of evidence, requires different standards of proof for justification to be required. If somebody wants to claim, if the state, for example, wants to claim that you've committed a crime, they have to show that beyond a reasonable doubt. Whereas if a claimant wishes to sue you for a particular, maybe a tortious action or a breach of contract, then the standard is much lower. The civil standard is on balance of probabilities. So in a specific example in which epistemology is actually applied on a day-to-day basis, the legal system, there is actually the wielding of epistemic contextualism, because it allows for the shifting of a moral of justification, of the standard of justification when it comes to determining knowledge. The final ones I want to talk about are known as the safe and anti-look approaches. This is a way to essentially introduce new concepts into the tripartite definition. So introduce concepts such as safety and anti-look. The idea here is that for a belief to count as knowledge, it must not only be true and justified, but it must also be safe. What do I mean by safe in that regard? Well, safe in the sense that it could not easily have been false under slightly different circumstances. So a belief is safe if and only if in similar circumstances it is unlikely to be the case that it is false. By contrast, then, anti-look is the belief is that a belief is not based on luck or chance. It is not just true by some kind of coincidence. So, in the example of the Smith and Jones and the 10 coins, Smith's belief is true by luck, so it does not therefore satisfy the anti-luck condition of this approach. A safer belief would be one that is likely to remain true in other similar situations. So all of these are theories of knowledge and responses to the Gettier problem. Some of them are more reliable, pardon the pun, than others, and some of them have stronger advocates than others. If you want to know more, then head down to the comment section below, and we'll discuss this in more detail. But generally speaking, this has obviously had a profound impact, the Gettier problem, on our most foundational theory of knowledge, the tripartite theory of knowledge. And while these several conditions have been proposed, not all of them are particularly satisfactory. You might even argue that none of them are satisfactory. And that leads some people to suggest that we should be looking instead for alternative theories of knowledge. That is going to be the subject of the next lesson, thinking about what some of these alternatives might be.